The sledgehammer hit my great-grandfather's hand-forged gate with a sound like thunder, sending sparks flying across the gravel driveway, while Karen Morrison stood there in her designer yoga outfit, filming the destruction on her iPhone and humming what sounded like "Ding Dong, the witch is dead." That's when I realized this perfectly manicured suburban housewife wasn't just trying to improve the neighborhood, she was trying to erase everything that made it worth living in. My name is Jake Sullivan, and I live on the last working ranch in Meadowbrook Estates, 5 acres of Texas Hill Country, that my great-grandfather homesteaded in 1923. What started as cattle land gradually got surrounded by suburban development. But my family held on to our slice of the Old West, even as McMansions sprouted around us like mushrooms after rain. The ranch isn't much to look at by modern standards. A weathered stone house with a wraparound porch, red barn that leans slightly to the left, and pastures where my horses graze among century-old oak trees. But what made it special was the entrance, an elaborate wrought iron gate that my great-grandfather had designed and forged himself back when men built things to last forever. The gate stood 12 feet tall and 16 feet wide, decorated with intricate metalwork depicting longhorn cattle, bluebonnets, and a banner reading Sullivan Ranch Est, 1923. Every sunrise caught the ironwork and threw dancing shadows across the gravel drive, and every sunset turned the metal into molten gold. It wasn't just an entrance, it was a work of art that announced to the world that this place had history, character, and pride. Karen Morrison moved into the house across the street 8 months ago, bringing with her a black Mercedes, a white husband named Preston, who worked in tech, and an attitude that suggested everyone in Texas had been doing everything wrong until she arrived from Connecticut. She became HOA president within 6 weeks, running on a platform of modernizing our community standards and protecting property values. Her first newsletter included a 20-point plan for aesthetic improvements, complete with before and after photos of neighborhoods she'd transformed in her previous locations. The trouble started with what Karen called her courtesy visits, friendly little inspections, where she'd walk around taking notes and offering suggestions. When she knocked on my door the first time, I made the mistake of being neighborly. "Jake, right? I'm Karen Morrison from across the way." She extended a hand that felt like shaking hands with a mannequin. I wanted to introduce myself and maybe chat about the neighborhood. I invited her in for sweet tea, thinking she might be lonely in a new place. Instead, she spent an hour cataloging everything she considered problematic about my property: the barn's weathered siding, the horse's odor impact, and most particularly, my gate. "It's very authentic," she said, studying the ironwork through my front window. "Very frontier-themed. But I have to ask, doesn't it seem a bit much?" "Well, it's quite imposing. Almost aggressive. Some of the newer residents find it intimidating." I looked at my great-grandfather's gate, a celebration of Texas heritage, forged by a man who'd built this ranch with his bare hands, and tried to understand how anyone could find it intimidating. "It's been there for 90 years, Karen. People seem to like it." "Oh, I'm sure they do. It's very historical. But times change, don't they? Modern entrance designs are more welcoming, more inclusive. Something sleeker might better represent our community's forward-thinking values." The word inclusive, coming from someone who just called my family's heritage intimidating, made my jaw clench. "I'll think about it," I said, which was polite Texan for absolutely not. Karen smiled like she'd won something. "Wonderful. I'll send you some design ideas from our Community Standards Guide. I think you'll find them very inspiring." 2 days later, the certified letter arrived. "Dear Mr. Sullivan," it began, "following our productive conversation about community aesthetic standards, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA Board has voted to implement new entrance design requirements. Your current gate structure has been identified as non-compliant with Section 4.7 of our community guidelines. Entrance structures must maintain visual harmony with neighborhood character. You have 30 days to submit a replacement plan or face daily fines of $200. Section 4.7 hadn't existed when I'd reviewed the HOA guidelines before buying the property. Karen had written new rules specifically targeting my gate. But what really got my blood boiling was the attached suggested replacement designs, a collection of bland, cookie-cutter entrance features that looked like they'd been ordered from a suburban catalog. Not one had an ounce of character or history. I called the HO, a management company, to file a complaint, but the receptionist delivered news that made my stomach drop. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sullivan, but Mrs. Morrison has changed our management agreement. All disputes now go through her directly." Karen had made herself judge, jury, and executioner for her own rules. That evening, I stood by my gate as the sun set behind the oak trees, running my hands over the ironwork my great-grandfather had hammered into shape nearly a century ago. Each twist of metal told a story of cattle drives and drought years, of building something from nothing in a land that didn't forgive weakness. Karen appeared at her front window, watching me through gauze curtains like a spider studying a fly in her web. But what I saw in her garage that night, when she thought no one was looking, told me this wasn't about community standards at all. The next morning, I borrowed binoculars from my neighbor Tom and confirmed what I'd glimpsed the night before. Karen's garage was full of ironwork, professional blacksmithing equipment, anvils, torches, and what looked like sections of ornate gate designs. Karen Morrison wasn't just some uptight suburban transplant. She was a metal worker who wanted to replace my great-grandfather's gate with her own work. The realization hit me like a kick from an angry horse. This wasn't about community standards or aesthetic harmony. It was about professional jealousy. Karen had moved to Texas, thinking she'd found a market for custom ironwork, only to discover that the most impressive piece in the neighborhood was already taken. She wasn't trying to improve the community. She was trying to eliminate her competition. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to fight fire with fire. If Karen wanted to play games with HOA rules, I'd show her what a fourth-generation Texan could do with home field advantage. My first move was research. I spent 3 days at the county courthouse, digging through decades of property records, zoning documents, and HOA filings. What I found was pure gold. Karen's new community standards violated the original HOA covenant in at least 6 different ways. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA had been founded in 1987, with specific language protecting existing structures of historical or cultural significance. My gate qualified on both counts. More importantly, any changes to community standards required a 2/3 vote of all property owners, not just the board. Karen had written her new rules in secret and implemented them without the required community input. I called an emergency HOA meeting for the following Thursday, citing the violations I discovered. Karen tried to postpone it, but when I threatened to file a complaint with the state attorney general's office, she backed down. The meeting took place in the community center, a beige building that smelled like industrial coffee and broken dreams. About 30 neighbors showed up, the largest attendance in the HOA's history. Karen sat at the head table, wearing a navy blazer and her most professional smile, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "I want to address some concerns about our recent aesthetic improvements initiative," I began, projecting confidence I didn't entirely feel. Specifically, the process by which these new standards were implemented. Karen's smile never wavered. "Michael, I appreciate your engagement with community governance, but I'm afraid you may not fully understand the board's authority to implement necessary improvements." "Actually, I understand it perfectly. That's why I brought these." I held up copies of the original HOA covenant. Section 12A clearly states that any new community standards must be approved by a 2/3 vote of all property owners. When was that vote held? The room went quiet. Karen's smile flickered for just a moment. The board has authority to interpret existing standards and implement clarifying guidelines, but not to create new ones. And according to Section 8CE, existing structures of historical significance are protected from arbitrary aesthetic requirements. I distributed copies of the relevant documents to everyone in the room. Karen watched her carefully constructed authority crumble as neighbors read the evidence for themselves. Furthermore, I continued, I have reason to believe these new standards weren't created for community benefit, but for personal profit. Now, Karen's mask was slipping. That's a very serious accusation, Michael. It's also a very accurate one. I held up printouts from Karen's business website. Morrison Metalworks, LLC Custom Ironwork, and Architectural Features. Same address as Karen's house. The room erupted in murmurs. Karen had been using her HOA authority to drum up business for her metalworking company. Mrs. Morrison called out elderly Mrs. Rodriguez from the back of the room. Are you trying to force us to buy gates from your business? Of course not. That would be completely inappropriate. The new standards are designed to benefit everyone. Then why, I interrupted, does your suggested replacement catalog include contact information for Morrison Metalworks? Karen's face went through several interesting color changes before settling on deep red. This meeting is adjourned. The board will review these allegations and respond appropriately. She tried to leave, but half the room was on their feet demanding answers. The vote to remove her new standards was unanimous. The vote to launch an investigation into her business practices was 31-1, with only Karen dissenting. I walked out of that meeting thinking I'd won the war. But what Karen did next made me realize she was far more dangerous than I'd imagined. The county inspector arrived at 7 a.m. on a Friday morning, clipboard in hand, and a grim expression that suggested someone's day was about to get much worse. Behind him walked Karen, wearing a hard hat and a smile that made my skin crawl. Mr. Sullivan? I'm Inspector Rodriguez with the County Building Department. I need to examine your entrance gate for code compliance. My heart sank. What code compliance? Ma'am? Inspector Rodriguez looked at Karen. Well, Karen said in her sweetest voice, as HOA president, I felt it was my duty to ensure all structures in our community meet current safety standards. That gate is nearly a century old, and we simply can't risk liability issues if it fails and injures someone. Inspector Rodriguez walked around my gate with the thoroughness of a man who'd done this too many times. He measured the clearance height, tested the hinges, examined the foundation posts, and took photographs from every angle. Sir, this structure predates modern building codes by several decades. While it appears structurally sound, it doesn't meet current standards for entrance gates in residential communities. What current standards? He consulted his clipboard. Height restrictions, automated safety features, visibility requirements, emergency access protocols. The list is extensive. Karen stood behind him, practically glowing with satisfaction. I'm sure it's just a matter bringing everything up to code. Very routine. The required modifications would be substantial, Inspector Rodriguez continued. Essentially, you'd need to rebuild the entire structure to meet current regulations. And if I don't, the county would have to condemn it as a safety hazard. Karen's trap was perfect. She couldn't force me to remove the gate through HOA rules, so she'd used county building codes instead. Either I destroyed my great-grandfather's masterpiece to build something compliant, or the county would do it for me. How long do I have? 60 days to submit modification plans. Another 60 to complete the work. After they left, I sat on my porch, staring at the gate that had welcomed 4 generations of my family home. The afternoon light caught the metalwork the way it had for 90 years, turning iron into art and history into something you could touch. Karen appeared at her mailbox, making a show of collecting her mail while watching my reaction. When our eyes met, she waved cheerfully. "Such a shame about the gate," she called across the street. "But I'm sure you'll come up with something wonderful to replace it." I'd be happy to provide some design consultation at very reasonable rates, of course. That night, I called my Uncle Frank in San Antonio. Frank was a retired welder who'd learned the trade from my great-grandfather himself, and when I explained what Karen was trying to do, his response was immediate and unprintable. "That woman's trying to destroy Granddad's work? Over my dead body." "She's got the county on her side, Uncle Frank. Building codes, safety regulations. Building codes my ass. I helped maintain that gate for 40 years. It's sounder than most of the crap they build today." Frank was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Jake, you remember what Granddad always said about dealing with bullies? Give them what they want, but not the way they want it." "Exactly. Karen wants you to replace the gate, then replace it. But do it in a way that makes her regret ever messing with the Sullivan family." "What do you mean?" Frank's chuckle was pure mischief. "How familiar are you with medieval fortress design?" But before I could ask what he meant, I heard the sound of metal grinding against metal outside. Through my window, I saw Karen's husband, Preston, attacking my gate with an angle grinder, sending showers of sparks into the darkness. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, running toward the gate in my pajamas. Preston jumped back, angle grinder still running, his face a mask of guilt and terror. "I was just," Karen said. "We're helping you with the safety modifications." "By cutting up my gate at midnight?" Karen appeared from behind their mailbox, wearing all black like some suburban ninja. "David, we're trying to help." The county inspector identified several sharp edges that pose injury risks. "We're just smoothing them out as a neighborly gesture." The sharp edges Preston had been grinding were the decorative cattle horns that formed the gate's signature design, irreplaceable details that my great-grandfather had spent weeks perfecting. "Get away from my property. Both of you, now." "There's no need to be hostile," Karen said, but she was backing toward her house. "We're simply trying to prevent accidents before someone gets hurt. The only accident here is going to be what happens to that grinder if you don't put it down." Preston dropped the tool like it was on fire and scurried after his wife. But the damage was done. Deep gouges scarred the metalwork, and pieces of broken design littered the gravel. I spent the rest of the night documenting the vandalism, taking photographs that made my chest tight with rage. In the morning, I filed a police report for destruction of property and called my insurance company to document the damage. But Karen was already 3 steps ahead. "Mr. Sullivan?" The police officer who arrived looked uncomfortable. "I'm Officer Martinez. I need to ask you about an incident last night involving your neighbors. They vandalized my gate with power tools." "Right? Well, Mrs. Morrison filed a complaint this morning, claiming you threatened them with physical violence while they were performing court-ordered safety modifications." "Court-ordered?" Officer Martinez consulted his notes. According to her statement, the county inspector issued an emergency order requiring immediate safety corrections, and she was helping you comply with the deadline. Karen had twisted the entire incident, making herself look like a good Samaritan and me look like an unstable property owner who threatened helpful neighbors. That's complete bullshit. I never threatened anyone, and there was no emergency order. Do you have documentation of the inspector's actual requirements? I realized, with sinking dread, that I'd never asked for written copies of Inspector Rodriguez's findings. Karen had orchestrated the whole inspection, and now it was her word against mine. "Look," Officer Martinez said, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. "No one's pressing charges today. But I need you to understand that if there are any more incidents between you and the Morrisons, I'll have to take official action." After he left, I stood in my driveway looking at my damaged gate and feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Karen had managed to vandalize my property and make me look like the aggressor, all while positioning herself as the reasonable party trying to help. But as I swept up the metal shavings from her safety modifications, I found something that made me smile for the first time in days. Detailed photographs Karen had taken of the gate's original design, probably for her own reference. She'd just given me the evidence I needed to rebuild it bigger and better than before. Uncle Frank arrived the next morning with a flatbed truck full of steel, a portable forge, and a determination that reminded me why the Sullivan family had survived 90 years in Texas. When he saw the damage to great-grandfather's gate, his language would have made a cowboy blush. "That woman destroyed a century of craftsmanship," he growled, running his fingers over the gouged metal. "Granddad spent 3 months on those cattle horns alone. Can you fix it?" "Fix it? Hell no. We're not fixing anything." Frank's grin was pure Texas defiance. "We're building something that'll make this gate look like a garden ornament." "Frank," the county inspector said. The county inspector said you needed to meet current building codes. He didn't say anything about staying small. Over the next 3 days, Frank explained his plan. We weren't just rebuilding the gate, we were constructing what he called a historically accurate representation of 19th century ranch security architecture. In other words, a fortress entrance that would make medieval castle builders weep with envy. The new design included 16-foot stone pillars topped with wrought iron lanterns, massive wooden doors reinforced with decorative iron bands, an automated opening system with both remote and keypad access, security cameras disguised as historical lighting fixtures, a covered gatehouse with period-appropriate architectural detail. "But the best part," Frank said, showing me the blueprints, "is that everything meets current building codes. Automated safety features, emergency access provisions, proper electrical installation. The county can't touch it." We pulled permits on Monday, started construction on Wednesday, and by Friday we had Karen's full attention. She appeared at my property line that morning wearing a business suit and carrying a leather portfolio, like she was heading to a corporate merger instead of confronting her neighbor. "David, we need to talk." "About what?" "About this construction project. It seems somewhat excessive for a simple gate replacement." I looked at the stone pillars. Frank was building massive limestone blocks, quarried from the same hill where my great-grandfather had found stone for the original house. County inspector said I needed to meet current codes. This meets current codes. But surely something simpler would suffice. More in keeping with neighborhood character. "Karen, you destroyed the neighborhood character when you ground up my great-grandfather's gate with power tools." Her mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "That was a misunderstanding. Preston was trying to help. Preston was following your orders to vandalize my property. The only misunderstanding was thinking I'd let you get away with it." Frank emerged from behind the stone pillars, wiping sweat from his forehead and studying Karen like she was a particularly interesting species of rattlesnake. "Ma'am, you must be the neighbor David told me about. The one with opinions about Texas craftsmanship. I'm Karen Morrison, HOA president." "And you are?" "Frank Sullivan. I built half the decorative ironwork in San Antonio, including the gates at the Alamo Museum." His voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd spent 50 years turning raw metal into art. "David tells me you think his great-grandfather's work was too." "What was the word? Rustic?" Karen's professional smile faltered. "Well, times change. Modern design sensibilities." "Lady, I've seen your work. Frank gestured toward her house, where decorative iron railings flanked the front steps. It's competent. Machine manufactured, assembly line competent, but it's got about as much soul as a shopping mall. I beg your pardon? What David's great-grandfather built was art. What you make is merchandise. There's a difference. Karen's face flushed deep red. I don't think you understand the situation here. As HOA president, you've got authority over community standards. But here's private property, and this gate's going to meet every single building code in the state of Texas. You got a problem with that? Take it up with the county. That evening, Karen struck back with a move that caught me completely off guard. The doorbell rang at 9 p.m., and I opened it to find a man in an expensive suit holding a thick legal folder. David Sullivan? I'm Richard Morrison, Karen's brother. I'm also an attorney specializing in property law. His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. We need to talk. Richard Morrison settled into my living room like a snake coiling in tall grass, spreading legal documents across my coffee table with the confidence of someone who'd never lost an argument. David, my sister tells me there's been some tension about community improvements. I'd like to help resolve this before it becomes unpleasant. The word unpleasant carried enough menace to make my skin crawl. She vandalized my gate. There's nothing to resolve. Actually, there's quite a lot to resolve. Richard opened his briefcase and pulled out a file thick enough to choke a horse. You see, in researching your property history, we've discovered some interesting discrepancies. My stomach dropped, but I kept my voice steady. What kind of discrepancies? Well, for starters, your ranch predates the current zoning laws by several decades. What was legal agricultural land in 1923 is now zoned residential. Keeping livestock within a residential zone requires special permits that. Well, let's just say your horses are technically illegal. He was right. The county had rezoned the area in the 1980s, but my property had been grandfathered in under agricultural use provisions. At least, I thought it had been. More importantly, Richard continued, the size and scope of your new gate project requires commercial construction permits, not residential ones. Building what amounts to a fortress entrance on residentially zoned land could trigger a complete zoning review of your entire property. The trap was masterful. If I continued building the gate, Karen's brother would have the county reclassify my property, making my horses illegal and my ranch worthless. If I stopped building, Karen would win by default. What do you want? Richard's smile was his sister's smile, but sharper. Simple. Remove the gate project, return to standard residential entrance design, and acknowledge that the HOA has authority over community aesthetic standards. In exchange, we'll overlook the zoning violations and forget this whole unfortunate incident. And if I refuse, then we'll be forced to protect the community through legal channels. Zoning violations, livestock violations, construction permit violations. The county takes these things very seriously. After Richard left, I sat on my porch, feeling like a man watching his world burn down. Karen hadn't just attacked my gate, she'd found a way to threaten everything my family had built for a century. But Uncle Frank, who'd been listening from the kitchen, had a different perspective. Jake, remember what your great-grandfather used to say about the cattle business? You can't stop a stampede by standing in front of it. Right, but you can sure as hell redirect it. Frank's eyes held a gleam that made me nervous. Karen wants to play legal games? Let's play legal games. What do you mean? I mean it's time to remind these people that your great-grandfather didn't just build gates, he built the foundation this whole damn community sits on. Frank disappeared into my attic and returned with a wooden crate I'd never seen before. Inside were documents that made my hands shake. the original land grants, mineral rights, water rights, and easement agreements that established Sullivan Ranch as the foundational property for everything that became Meadowbrook Estate. Your great-grandfather owned 800 acres here, Jake. He sold most of it to developers in the 1960s, but he kept the mineral rights, the water rights, and something else that's about to make Karen's life very interesting. Frank held up a yellowed document with official seals and faded signatures. He kept the right to restrict access to his property for any reason, including access to the natural spring that supplies water to half the neighborhood. What does that mean? It means Karen's house and about 20 others get their water from the spring on your land. Your great-grandfather granted permanent access in exchange for respecting his property rights. But if those rights are violated, the implications hit me like lightning. I can cut off their water, legally, ethically, and with full support of the original property agreements. Frank's smile was pure predator. Karen wants to play legal games? Let's show her what happens when you pick a fight with someone who holds all the cards. But before we could make our move, Karen played a card that almost destroyed everything and revealed just how far she was willing to go to win. Monday morning, I woke up to find my horses missing. Not escaped missing. The pasture gate was open, but there were no hoof prints leading away from the property. 30 years of ranching experience told me someone had loaded my animals into a trailer while I slept. I was calling the sheriff when Karen appeared at my front door, carrying a manila envelope and wearing an expression of theatrical concern. "David, I heard about your horses. How terrible. I wanted to give you this as soon as possible." Inside the envelope was a notice from the County Animal Control Department. Seized livestock will be held pending resolution of zoning violations and animal welfare concerns. "You had my horses stolen?" "Seized," Karen corrected gently. "When we reported the zoning violations to animal control, they felt it was necessary to ensure the animals' safety while the legal issues are resolved. My horses are perfectly safe. They've been on this land for 15 years without proper residential livestock permits." Karen's voice was silk wrapped around steel. "David, I know this seems harsh, but we simply can't ignore regulatory violations. What if someone got hurt? What if there was an incident?" The beautiful part of her plan was that it forced me to choose, fight the zoning issues, and leave my horses in county custody for months, or give up and let Karen win by default. But she'd made one critical mistake. In her eagerness to steal my horses, she'd triggered an automatic review of all property agreements in the area, including the water rights that Uncle Frank had discovered. "Karen," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm, "I think you should know that seizing my livestock has voided the water access agreement your house depends on." "I'm sorry?" "The original property covenant includes specific language about respecting existing agricultural operations. By having my horses seized, you've violated the terms that guarantee your water access." For the first time since I'd met her, Karen looked uncertain. That's not possible. Our water comes from county utilities." "No, it doesn't. Your water comes from the Sullivan Ranch Spring, same as it has since 1967. Check your property deed. There's an easement granting access in exchange for respecting ranch operations." I handed her a copy of the document Frank had found. As she read, her perfect composure cracked like ice on a warm pond. "This is just an old piece of paper. It doesn't mean anything today. Actually, it means everything today. Those water rights are registered with the state of Texas and supersede any local zoning ordinances. You want to play legal games? Congratulations, you just played yourself." I pulled out my phone and called the number for Texas Water Rights Commission. "Yes, I need to report a violation of registered water access agreements. Someone's interfering with livestock operations that are protected under our original covenant." Karen tried to grab the phone. You can't be serious. You'd cut off water to 20 families over a property dispute? You seized my animals over a gate dispute. Seems like fair play to me. This is insane. People need water? People need their livestock too. Funny how that works. The next 48 hours were the most intense of my life. Karen called in every favor she had: county commissioners, state representatives, even a Texas Rangers captain who owed Preston's tech company money. But water rights in Texas are serious business, and my great-grandfather had done his paperwork properly. By Wednesday afternoon, half the neighborhood was without water, and Karen was the most hated woman in Meadowbrook Estates. The county emergency management director called a crisis meeting for Thursday evening, with mandatory attendance for all parties involved in the dispute. Karen showed up looking like she'd aged 10 years in 3 days. Her perfect hair was unwashed, her designer clothes wrinkled, and her hand shook when she tried to light her cigarette in the parking lot before the meeting. "David," she said as we walked into the community center, "we need to end this. People are suffering because of our disagreement. People are suffering because you stole my horses. I was following county regulations. You were following your own greed, but you picked the wrong family to mess with." The meeting was packed with angry neighbors, county officials, and enough tension to power the entire community center. Karen sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, while Uncle Frank and I presented our case to a room full of people who just wanted their water back. The resolution was swift and brutal. The county ordered my horses returned immediately, dropped all zoning violation charges, and formally recognized my property's agricultural status. Karen was required to pay all legal fees, livestock boarding costs, and damages for the gate vandalism. But the real victory came when the county inspector publicly acknowledged that my original gate had met all safety requirements and never needed modification in the first place. Karen had destroyed my great-grandfather's artwork for nothing. With my horses back in their pastures and my water rights secured, I had a choice to make about the gate. I could rebuild my great-grandfather's original design, or I could follow through on Uncle Frank's fortress idea.